Harold Chestnut, pioneer in automatic control and systems engineering. His complex theoretical and mathematical contributions helped form many of today's most amazing technologies, yet few know his name or that of his colleagues. Hal's work began during World War II, and soon after he published a landmark book in his field that led to international recognition in the early 1950s. At the time, Hal and the GE team worked with little interaction with academia and the rest of the world.
It was a strange time because people didn't travel that much in these places. You couldn't. You needed visas and passports and all kinds of documentation, that some of which don't make any sense anymore. But there was a lot of curiosity, a lot of feeling that there's some very smart people in other places in the world. I wonder what they know. I wonder what I should do to get to know them better.
Harold's name continues to circulate around the world when, in 1956, at a meeting in Heidelberg, Germany, his name comes up. A group called the International Federation of Automatic Control, or IFAC, is looking for a leader. The group's mission is sharing technical ideas and advanced technology for the common good.
Control became international science, and some organization was extremely needed to supervise.
IFAC's roots had been at MIT in the radiation laboratory, where many of the world's best engineers had met during the war effort. These multinational friendships helped form the basis of IFAC's mission: cooperation.
And of course the most interesting question was, will the Soviets come and participate? Why was this interesting? Well, because not long before that moment, Soviets triumphed with their Sputnik satellites and so on, so the West was almost stunned by these successes. So much was said about their advances in mathematics and in control theory. So this is how control theory came in the forefront of international cooperation.
At that time we have very many really big scientists in the region of control theory.
Harold takes a position as the first president of IFAC and immediately has a problem to solve.
To set up an organization across the Iron Curtain was very unusual.
One of the things it stood for then was bringing some measure of bridging between the Soviet Union and the West, because there was almost no scientific meeting in any discipline at the time IFAC was set up.
That was a miracle, what really Harold did.
They were very careful to have almost as many officials from the Eastern Bloc as from the Western countries.
An East-West balance is important. So as part of the agreement, the first president, Harold Chestnut, is a Westerner, and the first IFAC World Congress is to be hosted in the East, in Moscow. Harold and Alexander Letov eagerly planned the event for June of 1960. Meanwhile, 2,500 miles away, trouble was about to strike. Gary Powers was taking off from a U.S. air base in Pakistan.
Secret reconnaissance of Russia by high-flying American U-2 jets ended when one was downed deep in Soviet territory. Its pilot, Francis Powers, was made the subject of a showcase trial.
Chestnut and Letov are faced with a difficult decision, but they decide to continue with the conference anyway.
We got into the airport, and there were a number of people on the flight that I knew, even some Stanford people. And for us, you know, it was an incredible adventure, because nobody had ever been to the Soviet Union. nobody has ever been to Moscow. So it was like landing on the moon.
The first meeting in Moscow had about 1,000 attendees from all over the world, which was remarkable. It was opened by Kosygin, the prime minister at that time.
As one can imagine, governments from both sides have a strong interest in the proceedings of the Congress.
People who went to these IFAC meetings were briefed by briefers from defense organizations to try to pick up technologies and ideas or find out. Certainly in the very beginning, when you had people who had never met each other and governments that hadn't met these people they wanted to meet, there were a number of people who were helpful to their own governments by just, well, yeah, he's a short guy and he seems particularly active and it looks like he may have a heart attack tomorrow or something.
Meanwhile, outside in Gorky Square, pieces of Power's plane are displayed for the public to see. When Americans from the IFAC group visit the display and wait in line, the Russian police take them out to the front of the crowd to make sure they can see the display.
The hotel was called Hotel Ukrainia. It had 2,000 rooms. And the elevator is letting people on and off, all the way. You know, it's like the milk run. Whenever we went by the 13th floor, nobody ever got on, nobody ever got off. The elevator door wouldn't open. One time I was in the elevator, and for some strange reason, it stopped on the 13th floor and the door opened. And a bunch of guys were in the elevator, a bunch of us were in the elevator. And we looked out and we're astounded. We looked down a hallway. You saw racks and racks and racks of equipment with glowing tubes. Everything they did at that time was tubes. Everything we did here was already transistorized.
On the 13th floor of the Hotel Ukrainia, the KGB had filled the rooms with racks of bugging equipment. So this is why they put all the foreigners in this hotel. Need I say more?
If you had classified information in your head, you had to be damn careful that you don't talk about that. That you can talk about anything. And when you're talking about politics with Russians, they are constantly looking over their shoulder, looking behind them to make sure nobody's watching. This was the first scientific conference ever with foreigners.
Despite the political environment, East-West friendships begin and communication flourishes.
At a personal level, we had all these scientists who could be thought of at that time as enemies, what politicians would say. But at the personal, scientific, engineering level, we were just colleagues in the same field. And
in the history of our field, there was such a momentous event. First of all, there was just about everybody from the field was there, all the famous people. You know, at the time, the most famous names were Pontryagin and Bellman, of course, they were there.
Norbert Wiener was there. He wrote a book called Cybernetics. And it didn't make much of a stir in the US, but it made a hell of a stir all over the rest of the world, particularly in the Soviet Union. It was cybernetics this and cybernetics that. That's where the word cyber comes from.
Bernard Woodrow wrote, "Wherever we went, the people of Moscow welcomed us with open arms, despite the fact that just 2 weeks earlier, an American spy plane had been shot down. They couldn't have been happier to see us." This was the first really big scientific meeting of the Soviet era, where they actually opened up the country and let some foreigners in.
We got into a taxi, and we're wearing badges from the conference. At the bottom it says C-SHA-A, which means USA. The taxi driver was just beside himself. He was so excited. He was so happy to have Americans in his taxi cab.
Clearly the organizers of the Congress wanted to do everything to impress the visitors. So the famous banquet for the Congress was kept in the Kremlin. Probably the Westerners have never seen so much caviar on the tables and lobsters and other delicacies.
That first World Congress is a success, and Hal continues his involvement as an officer of IFAC.
For Hal, here was a group of people with a common scientific interest and knowledge, respect for each other, highly educated, and he was right in the middle of that. so he could put groups together.
He wasn't open-minded, and actually we became friends, really friends, and everybody came together with all.
He has built up that times what we called IFAC family, and it was really, as far as it was possible, a family-like relation.
One important activity of IFAC is its newsletter, Automatica. At first, Automatica was an independent production under the leadership of Bob Maxwell. Harold helped bring the publishers of Automatica and IFAC together. Just like a medical journal whose intention is to spread information for advancement of knowledge, Automatica provides useful articles in several languages where engineers could share problem-solving ideas.
While the secrets were kept, the theoretical part of every result was open for exchange and discussion.
IFAC continues congresses around the world every 3 years. The meetings provide invaluable discussions that help advance the most rare of control study areas. But it is a challenge to keep IFAC functioning during these times. Both communication and travel were quite limited. Some Eastern delegates were constantly monitored.
They used to come with their minders. A minder is an individual who is probably a member of some police organization whose job it is to keep their eye on the delegates. There were very strict rules in those days. You had to have a visa to go to any place in Russia, a different visa for each place. And so all the delegates went there and they had visas to get to go to Moscow, but they couldn't go anywhere else. They couldn't even go out of town. And the Americans reciprocated, of course. Russian scientists could come to Minneapolis, but couldn't go to St. Paul. And this was a defense Cold War kind of a thing. And these control engineers, they know a lot of stuff. They can build bombs and airplanes and finally missiles and all that kind of stuff. Alex Letov, who was the second president of IFAC, Russian, was in Minneapolis visiting me. And we went to St. Paul. His visa said Minneapolis, that was the way. We had dinner in St. Paul, we joked about it. You know, all this stupid stuff that for today's generation is unbelievable.
When we had an IFAC Congress in Budapest, in Hungary, we sent out the call for papers as usual, and at that time everything was done by mail. Everything leaving the Soviet Union had to go through very formal checks, probably by the KGB. So what we did, we had people who had good personal contacts in the Soviet Union. They had been studying at Soviet universities, and our representatives sort of smuggled out the Soviet papers in a suitcase.
He got a letter of American readers of his scientific paper, and they asked him some questions and so on. So after this, he was invited to KGB, and they asked him to explain what are your relations with these Americans, and they are involved in some military activity and so on. So Tsipkin had very, very hard time, and he explained that he didn't know them and he has no relations to them and so on.
Even as the Eastern Bloc began to open up, the flow of communication is slow.
At one of our meetings, Boris Tam told us that from now on, you can use telex. So you can reach me by telex. This is the telex number. And everybody was very happy. A few of us tried to send telexes to Boris Tam, and they didn't go through. And then we called him by phone, and then he said, you didn't do it the right way. You first have to call me by phone, tell me that a telex would be sent. Then I will notify the KGB that I'm expecting a telex, and then they would let it through.
Harold's personality helped keep the organization running smoothly, despite the challenges and internal disagreements.
My research area is on leader-follower games, and one of the concepts in that theory is that the leader tries to put herself or himself in the shoes of the followers to let them see it your way, so you don't force them to do what you want, but you induce them to do what they want, but in the process they do it your way.
I had the opportunity to give a seminar at the GE Research Center. Chestnut was there attending the seminar and was a very kind person, very easy to talk to.
What I remember was this very quiet, first-class sober, but at the same time very, very charming gentleman. And elder colleagues might remember John Coles. With him, he was often together. Nat Cohn, also of course an American. Axelby, who just passed away a few months ago. So this was a very, very impressive group of people.
He had a wide spectrum of friends. He seemed to appreciate the intellectual abilities of them, whatever those intellectual abilities were. I sensed that he didn't appreciate people pulling the wool over his eyes or blowing smoke. But if they knew a lot about what they were talking about, whatever they were talking about, they were of interest to him.
IFAC continues to grow over the next few years. The number of nations with delegates increases as the scientific field expands.
We learned about people who had done remarkable work in remote places as a result of IFAC. There were very prominent people that emerged into the IFAC scene, prominent in their own country, both politically, politically, and certainly scientifically. So the friendships replaced the formalities. And I think that's one of the reasons why the field progressed so quickly.
In IFAC, Harold had participated in some important events, but the next one was about to top them all. In early 1961, James Webb is leading an effort to do something truly amazing. It is a task which will involve thousands of engineers in many research locations. The question is, how are they going to send an object the size of a bus on the longest journey in human history, all the while keeping men inside alive, using a myriad of interlocking automatic control systems? Naturally, Harold Chestnut was in on this project.
The LEM, CM, and SM go to the Environment Control Test Building, where an environmental control system to fully utilize the GE 225 computer. The program was especially divided into 3 parts.
Harold works for the next few years on Apollo mission planning.
Here go. Stop alarm. 1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm. 1201 alarm. Stand time for go flight. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. Okay, 75 feet. Car's looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. Forward. Forward. 40 feet, down 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward, just. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle.
Finally, the world watches as the work of thousands comes to life in July 1969 when the Eagle lands on the moon. Shortly after, a letter came in for Hal. Dear Dr. Chestnut, I appreciate you with great admiration on tremendous achievements that you have reached in the Apollo program. Sincerely yours, Alexander Letov. Harold continues his tradition of involvement in many groups. He chairs the American Institute of Electrical Engineers Technical Committee on Automated Control Systems, Man and Cybernetics. Clarence Linder, another Schenectady engineer, led the motion to merge the Institute of Radio Engineers and the AIEE. Clarence had the help of Harold and others who saw the move as promoting efficiency on a national level.
Those two were merged into the IEEE, or the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, in 1963. And I know Hal Chestnut was one of the leading personalities in making that merger happen.
The IEEE grows international over time and helps develop standards for all forms of electronics. Its mission is to benefit humanity, advance the engineering profession, and promote the well-being of its members. Anything electric that one can find in their house or car has been researched and certified by the IEEE. They create the standards for wireless internet, TV, radio, and more. The IEEE eventually becomes the world's largest technical professional society. Over the next decade, Harold participates as a director, treasurer, and president of the IEEE. Hal keeps quite busy in both academia and the private sector. He earns an honorary doctorate from Case Institute of Technology and is inducted into the prestigious National Academy of Engineering. Hal runs into conflict at work. A requirement of being involved in all these organizations is travel.
As a manager, I had a little problem because Chestnut wanted to travel a lot, you know? And I said, hey, you got work to do here. You know what I mean? You had to do. And, but then he was off, and sometime he wanted me to pay for his trips. And I, unfortunately, had a very tight budget, you know, because, the auditors were very tight and the financial people. So I had a little problem with them, and I was trying to do my best, but I really had to squeeze some dollars, rob from Peter to pay Paul, to be able to take care of Chestnut. But he was so well done job that his job was always worthwhile.
General Electric ends up approving his frequent travel because of the indirect benefit of promoting General Electric's reputation around the globe. In India, Hal is hosted by F.C. Kohli of Tata Consultancy Services. Coincidentally, years later, Mr. Kohli will end up being considered the father of the Indian software industry.
This trip was considered to be a continuation of my role as IEEE president, and I visited New Delhi, Kanpur. The net result was I had entree to high-level people in the planning, policy, and operation of India.
By the 1970s, Hal had become a family man with 3 sons. Irma Ruth and Harold stay active in the local community.
I think they both were smart in their own ways, and I think they complemented each other very well. I think my father was a very sort of theoretical guy, and I think my mother had a lot of sort of common sense, and consequently, the two of them made a terrific team. And long before the term women's liberation, or long before marriage was seen as a partnership, the two of them really had that in the relationship they had.
What you see, what you saw was what you got. He had no hidden agendas, and when other people presented themselves, he accepted that picture.
In many ways, we complement each other. She is a lot more verbal and perceptive in terms of personal relations. Very, well, she's just a tremendous person.
My father, in his own way, I mean, was a very technical guy, but he also was a spiritual guy in a lot of ways. And he felt very at home in the outdoors.
Hal was especially fond of the Lake Luzerne area in upstate New York. He would take international guests to his family camp whenever he could. For Hal, the lake was a place to escape by swimming, sailing, and painting.
He loved climbing the mountains there. There's a great inlet that is a very sort of special natural environment, and we used to love to go canoeing, and so I think that place really was a place where he felt as comfortable and as at home as anywhere in the world.
Loved to swim, and we would go to Lake Luzerne and we would swim across the lake. And he had the first sailboat on Lake Luzerne, which was this tiny sailfish, which now On a nice day in the summer on that lake, there might be 3 dozen of them. But his one with the pure red sail was the first.
In Schenectady, the Chestnuts became part of the community. Irma Ruth helped start the Schenectady Community College. They were active in the Boy Scouts, the Unitarian Church, Linton High School, and much more.
Downtown Schenectady had a slum area that had been cleaned out and there was nothing there, and Hal said, you know, we ought to build a new library there. At the time, the library was in what's now called Webster Hall, and it was outgrowing its roots. Well, you know the answer. The library is now in part of that vacant land, and that's part of the vision of Hal Chestnut.
I think they really felt a very big part of Schenectady, and wherever they could help out. And they weren't headline seekers. They were people who were willing to pitch in and do whatever it took.
One of the Chestnuts' activities was the Freedom Forum, a group that brought world-class speakers to Schenectady. The guests are invited to stay at the Chestnuts' home. Sons Andy and Tom remember those days as children.
And I remember there was Hubert Humphrey, there was Senator Proxmire, there was George McGovern.
Clement Attlee, who was one of the prime ministers of Great Britain after Churchill. My parents were very involved with that pretty much their whole adult lives, and that was a constant that every year, you know, whatever it was, 4 or 6 times a year, there would be Freedom Forum speakers coming in who were usually prominent in one field or another.
In 1973, OPEC issues an embargo on the West for supporting Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Gas lines and rationing are necessary around the Capital District. This event helps propel support for what would soon be called eco-technology. Harold sees increased demand for modern technology and energy in third world markets.
You know, there's many kinds of energy, and the energy that's most vital is oil. And in terms of becoming oil independent, based on the consumption we have right now, we're going to become more and more dependent all the time. If you go back during World War II, the United States was producing twice as much oil as we were using, so we were basically the Saudi Arabia of oil. As about 1970, our production was about equal to our consumption. So that's the time when we first became a net importer, and we also peaked at about 12 million barrels a day.
The new high demand for energy could possibly lead to war and instability in the future. Harold promotes eco-technology as a way to efficiently consume energy and meanwhile allow the quality of lives around the world to improve.
He showed me that you can make many systems which are energy efficient, which are much better performance, and they will help the benefit the society in many other ways.
As the world becomes more automated, concerns begin to develop. Harold responds to this at IFAC activities.
An important initiative of Harold was the Social Aspect Committee. The emphasis of IFAC on social effects of automation. And that were times was fear in the people that due to automation people lose their jobs. And we had to answer that.
Say, Tom, I just heard a rumor there's going to be a layoff. Think there's anything in it? We have finally decided to put in the new labor-saving machinery. Costs will be lower and production greater.
Truth is, I guess, that the people just can't afford to buy. They can't afford to pay our price.
There's only one thing to do now, as I see it, and that is to reduce our price. This would, I believe, give us a larger market and bring us many new customers who can use our product, but who cannot afford to buy it now.
The profit on each article would be less, of course. But if we succeed in expanding our market sufficiently, we might sell so many more articles, the total profit would not suffer. In fact, if the plan worked out real well, we might even have to buy more machines and re-employ the men who were laid off because of new equipment.
On the one hand, really, old jobs are diminishing, but new jobs are created, and that should be supported by educational programs and many other means. And that was one of the subjects of the Social Effects Committee.
Somebody say, Nemo profeta in patria, in Latin means nobody is a prophet in his own land. It turned out that Chestnut was much more appreciated in Japan, in Europe, than he was by his peers here in the United States. You know what I mean there? In particular, the Japanese were very interested in what he's doing, because Japan, the problems were much more serious than here. Small country, lots of pollution, energy shortages, and so on, you see.
The Japanese do show their appreciation. Harold gets a call from the Honda Motor Company in the summer of 1981. Soichiro Honda, the founder of Honda himself, invites him to a very special event.
1981年11月17日、東京。本田財団による今回の1981年本田賞は
Dr. Harold Chestnut, in recognition of his great contribution to the promotion of systems engineering research, in appreciation of his contribution towards the development of eco-technology.
In a grand ceremony on November 17, 1981, Hal becomes the second person to receive the Honda Prize for outstanding contributions in the field of eco-technology. Along with the award, he is given 10 million yen, equivalent to $94,000 today. Hal stands among other winners, including John Coles and Carl Sagan. Harold uses the money for his new initiative called SWIS, short for Supplemental Ways of Improving International Stability. Hal's idea is to use his talent in control theory to help maintain international peace. Automatic control theories can be used to monitor the combination of economy, politics, education, and infrastructure.
We can talk about resources, and if we talk about people, and we talk about countries, this is just a big system. And he said to himself, I wonder if there's some way to contribute, for engineers to contribute to international stability by applying some of these principles.
I mean, controls was his life. He looked at the world through a lens that was controls.
By 1983, Harold is ready to retire from General Electric. This now frees him to devote all his time to SWIS. In 1984, Harold commences the Symposium at Budapest, along with the IFAC International Congress. The Congress holds 14 technical committees, ranging from space to biomedical engineering. 2 sessions are held for SWIS.
At that time, the focus on the projects were of course, it was still the period of the Cold War, and major confrontation was east towards the west or west towards the east, it doesn't matter. That was the major concern. There were a number of other countries, among which my home country then was, which were called non-aligned countries, and which gradually promoted some ways in order to balance between the two sides.
Yugoslavia was in the middle. It was a so-called non-allied country. So it was neither in the Soviet bloc nor in the West, and that was like a neutral ground. So there was a series of meetings.
There were new people brought in. Economists came into IFAC because of this. Peace advocates, sort of technically oriented peace advocates, but nevertheless people interested in peace. And he attracted kind of a new crowd.
If you have as part of your goal to maintain world peace, then control ideas at least present guidelines to policymakers on how this is done.
Hal devotes himself fully to SWIS. He sells his beloved camp on Lake Luzerne to keep efforts running at various international conferences. Harold also keeps in touch with many fellow engineers to get the current state of international conditions. As the mid-1990s approach, Hal is forced to scale back his efforts due to the effects of Alzheimer's disease.
From then on, Hal would call me several times a year with just little ideas. Always very constructive, but very pointed. Obviously, he had been thinking about something, and he just picked up the phone and made a call. Always thinking. He was always a thinking man, up to the end.
Hal devotes his final years to being close to his family. In 2001, he leaves this world at 84 years of age. The Harold Chestnut Textbook Prize is named after him in 2002 and awards authors who have contributed the most to the education of control engineers. Harold Chestnut, the leader, the thinker, the mediator. He refined systems engineering, advanced technology, and promoted international cooperation. Hal's early work in IEEE and IFAC has germinated to a strong multinational organization. Thousands attend the many conferences around the world. Cold War tensions may have eased, but IFAC continues the tradition of cooperation in ever more participating countries.
Somehow this collection of people have kept this family business going, and it's going until today. And the new leadership comes in, and they all of a sudden get swallowed into the family, and they love it. And they do all this for free. They don't get paid anything for it.
Harold Chestnut, it's an outstanding figure.
I'd say he was a damn good engineer.
He was a people person. He knew how to relate.
Of course, I realized that the person is not just the first president of the IFAC, not just a cosmopolitan person. I have perceived him as if he were embracing the entire humanity, the entire mankind.
Harold Chestnut achieved many awards and certifications, but he'll be remembered most for his gifts to the local and international community. Harold Chestnut, the true Wizard of Schenectady.